Well, the Waxman-Markey cap-and-trade bill passed the House by a razor-thin margin. Now, if this legislation becomes law, will it help protect the environment, or is it just a power grab that'll harm or maybe kill the economy? Pajamas Media CEO Roger L. Simon sat down with Congressman Roy Blunt of Missouri to get his thoughts on cap-and-trade, nuclear power, and climate change. Let's take a look.
The recent cap-and-trade legislation, is it really pro-environment?
I don't think it's pro-environment at all. I think actually this legislation is sort of the ultimate liberal lose-lose. It makes us less competitive in the world. It raises our utility bills. It raises the cost of every single thing we make and every single thing we buy. People who are going to relocate their jobs because of that to other places are highly unlikely to relocate them in the United States, where we have standards for the environment. They're much more likely to relocate in Mexico or India or China. We saw Mrs. Clinton's visit to India produce no result. These catch-up countries are going to use this opportunity to catch up. And so we wind up losing jobs, and these jobs go to countries that put more pollutants in the air than we do. And it doesn't matter if the CO2 goes in the air in St. Louis or Shanghai, it has the same impact on the environment, and we should be concerned about that.
Do you think there actually is a man-caused anthropogenic global warming?
I think there's climate change, always has been climate change. I think it's really a mixed bag as to how much impact people have on that. I'm a believer in doing everything we can to protect the future as we protect our economy. Because what happens is the most ravaged environments are always those countries with the most struggling economies. And these things do have to go hand in hand. If you decide we're going to destroy our economy to protect the environment, you ultimately destroy the environment. And I'm not for that. I think we can do the right things. You know, if the president wanted to use coal, for instance, the one resource we have more of than anybody else in the world, he'd be saying, hey, a country that can put a man on the moon in 10 years can figure out how to take the CO2 out of coal. You know, maybe you take the CO2 out of coal and use it to grow algae and use that to create ethanol. There are lots of alternatives out there. And on energy, I'm for more American energy. I'm for all of the above: wind, solar, nuclear. We need to have energy a more important part of our economic future and be more energy independent as we can. But we're not going to get that energy independence by not using the resources we already have.
Why has our Congress and administration not been able to go nuclear the way the French and the Japanese have done so successfully?
Well, there's no reason to stop nuclear. Part of it has been, what do you do with the material that you can't store on site? The location for that has been designated for a long time, the future location in Harry Reid's state, and he's opposed to it. And I think that's part of it. Part of it is a political aversion to nuclear that goes back to the 1960s. We're still living at a time when people thought things could happen that has now been proven are not going to happen. Look at France, look at Europe, look at what's happening all over the world. We need to be focused on nuclear. I had Henry Waxman, your congressman, told me the other day in the hearing, I heard him say, well, you know, nuclear is not really a renewable because of the uranium you use. And I sat pretty close to him on that committee, and so I said, well, Chairman Waxman, that's like saying wind energy is not a renewable because you have to use metal to build the towers. Clearly, nuclear, hydro, wind, solar, all those things are renewables. We should be using all of those, but we also ought to be using and managing our fossil fuel resources as we move toward what will replace them at some time in the future and investing in whatever that replacement is.
One last philosophical question. How do people in Congress now deal with all the vast amount of technical and scientific data that they have to process in their legislation?
Well, you know, one of the things I've done since I came here a dozen years ago is I put my whole voting record on the website. I'm one of 2 or 3 members of Congress that have ever done that. And I remember we had a town hall meeting the first year I did it. I think that year there were like 496 votes that were not procedural. 496, and they're all there. Explains how I voted, a little explanation of what they were, and some guy stood up and seemed to know a whole lot more about one of those votes than I did, and I said, well, how did I do on the other 495? and he acted like he knew, and he said, I thought you did pretty good on the other 495. And I said, well, you know, the truth is that's probably about as good as I get, 495 out of 496. But there are lots of technical things that you have to deal with. These big issues right now of health care, energy, workplace rules, tax rules that are going to discourage job creation. Every member of Congress needs to be as involved in those as they can possibly be.
Thanks again for joining us, Congressman Blunt.
Good to be with you.